the bloodline truth they thought you'd never unearth. There is a reason you were born under the sign of Scorpio. Not to walk an easy path, not to live behind pretty lies, but to see what others pretend not to feel what others fear, and most of all to unearth the truths buried beneath generations of silence, shame, and secrets. If you have found yourself here right now watching this, I need you to pause, just for a moment, close your eyes, take a breath, and listen not just with your ears, but with that deep inner knowing that has never failed you. This is not just another message. This is a soul awakening. Because whether you're ready or not, the truth is rising, and it's coming from beneath the bloodline, a truth they thought you would never find, a betrayal so ancient, so strategically hidden, it seeped into your family's foundation like roots of poison, until one day, you felt it. A shift, a coldness, a silence that spoke louder than words. Scorpio, they called you dramatic. They told you it was all in your head, but you knew. You always knew, because your soul isn't new, your soul is ancient, and in this lifetime, it came here for one sacred purpose: to expose the hidden, to transform the poison, and to end the cycle. Someone close to you, someone in your blood, hid a dark truth, but they didn't just hide it, they buried it, and then they layered it with smiles, with Sunday dinners, with stories rewritten to protect the comfort of those who could not bear to face reality. But you were never meant to play their game. You were born to be the storm that shakes the silence, the mirror that shatters illusions, the one soul in the family line brave enough to dig through the rubble of history and pull out what was meant to stay hidden forever. And that is why they feared you. They didn't fear your words, they feared your perception. They feared that you would see through them, and worse, that you would name what they were too weak to confess. Scorpio, this is not just a message about betrayal. This is a ritual of remembrance. Because buried somewhere deep in your memory, your soul remembers the moment it first broke. That moment when a sister's eyes turned cold, when a promise turned into a weapon, when someone you trusted more than anyone chose to stand on the wrong side of your story. And even worse, someone else in your family watched it happen and did nothing. This message is not here to give you revenge. This message is here to give you your power back. And before we begin, I want you to know something that may shift your entire life. They didn't bury the truth because it wasn't real. They buried it because it was. Because it was powerful, because it threatened the lie that their identity depended on. But you were born for this. You were born to dig it up, to face it, to transform it, to rise not with bitterness, but with spiritual fire. So if you are ready to finally name what was never allowed to be spoken, if you are ready to become the alchemist of your family's karmic story, then come with me, Scorpio. Because the truth they buried in blood is rising, and this time it's rising through you. Part 1, the sister's secret. The first wound. There are wounds that bleed, and then there are wounds that stay quiet for years. Wounds that don't show up on your skin but echo in your spirit every time you hear her name. I'm talking about the betrayal that comes not from enemies, but from your own sister. From the one who was supposed to know your heart and protect it. Scorpio, you've always known this. The deepest cuts don't come with screams. They come with whispers, with a shared glance across a room that suddenly feels unfamiliar, with a silence so cold it shivers through your bones even in summer. And in your story, it wasn't a stranger who slipped the knife into your trust. It was her. The one you told your secrets to under the covers as a child. The one you covered for when she was late sneaking in. The one who once swore, "No matter what, I've got you." But one day something shifted, and you felt it not because she told you. She never would. You felt it because your soul did. Maybe it started as something small, a moment where she left you out of a family decision, a conversation where your name came up. and she said nothing to defend it. Or maybe it was worse. Maybe she took something sacred you shared in trust and passed it along like gossip. Maybe she painted you as dangerous, cold, jealous, when all you ever did was love her in the way only a Scorpio can, with loyalty that borders on obsession, with intensity that says, if I'm with you until the end. But she used it. She used your depth against you. She took your silence as an invitation, and while you stood still thinking your bond was blood, she was already selling your story to someone else, retelling it in a version that made her the victim and you the storm. What she didn't know, Scorpio, is that your silence isn't permission, it's observation. And you saw it all. You saw the way her energy shifted. You saw the lie in her smile. You saw how she stopped meeting your eyes, how the warmth became calculation. You didn't need proof. You didn't need texts. Your body knew. Your soul screamed. But you told no one. Why? Because part of you still hoped she'd come back. That maybe it was a misunderstanding, that surely someone who shared your blood would never choose betrayal over truth. You weren't wrong for hoping, you were just hoping from the wrong soul. The truth is, she was never wired like you. Where you seek transformation, she sought comfort. Where you fight for truth, she hides behind appearances. And when faced with the raw power of your depth, she flinched. She didn't betray you because you did something wrong. She betrayed you because you were becoming someone she could no longer control. You see, Scorpio, in every family, there's one who awakens first, one who starts asking questions others avoid, one who refuses to carry the weight of ancestral pain in silence. And when that person speaks, it threatens the whole system. You were that person. You were the one who broke the silence, and she hated you for it because it meant the mask had to fall. I once worked with a Scorpio woman who told me her story. She had spent years covering for her younger sister emotionally, financially, even spiritually. She would show up, rescue, protect, speak life into her when no one else would. But at a family gathering one year, everything shifted. Her sister stood in front of everyone and told a half-truth, a narrative soaked in shame and omission. She twisted the story to protect herself. And in that moment, the Scorpio woman realized she didn't just sell me out, she used my silence as currency. Scorpio, has this happened to you? Have you carried someone with your love only to realize they were dragging you behind their lies? Have you ever been painted as too much by someone who needed you to be smaller so they could feel taller? That is not your shame. That is their reflection. And I want you to write this somewhere sacred. I did not deserve her betrayal. I was not too much. I was just too true for someone who preferred lies. Because your sister's betrayal wasn't a random wound. It was the first crack in a mirror that has been reflecting a deeper truth about your soul mission. And that truth, you weren't born to be their echo. You were born to be the voice they tried to silence. So as we move forward, I want you to know the betrayal wasn't the end, it was the invitation to power, to clarity, to liberation from every illusion they built around your name. Life lesson from part 1. The sister's secret life lesson. Not every bond is sacred just because it's built on blood. Sometimes the ones closest to you are simply playing the role that reveals your power. Scorpio, you are not meant to carry the shame of their actions, only the wisdom that came from surviving them. Let their betrayal be your liberation. Let it teach you who you truly are, the soul who chooses truth over comfort, even when it costs you everything, because in that choice, you become free. Part 2. The silent accomplice. The second betrayal. Some betrayals don't arrive with knives. They arrive with silence, and that silence can be far more lethal than any spoken lie. Scorpio, after the wound your sister delivered, you may have searched the room, the family, the memories, looking for someone who saw what was happening. Someone who would step in, defend you, stop it. But no one did, because there was someone else, someone you trusted, someone older, wiser, respected. Someone who should have known better. And they said nothing. They were in the room. They saw the damage. They heard the words twisted out of context. They watched the way your sister bent your story into something unrecognizable. And they just sat there, maybe sipping their tea, maybe changing the subject, maybe even nodding along. And that, Scorpio, was the moment you realized you weren't just betrayed by one, you were abandoned by two. The second betrayal wasn't loud, it didn't shout, it whispered with its inaction. It confirmed your deepest fear that when the storm hit, even those who claimed to love you would quietly step out of the way and let you drown. It's one thing to be betrayed. It's another to realize that someone had the power to stop it and chose not to. And they always tell you, oh, I didn't know what to say, or I didn't want to make things worse. But Scorpio, deep down, you know they chose a side. And it wasn't yours. Do you remember that moment? The way the air in the room changed. How the silence didn't feel neutral but loaded. The way your soul screamed, "Why aren't you saying anything?" But your lips never asked because somewhere inside you already knew the answer. They knew the truth, and their silence was a weapon. It wasn't a lack of courage. It was a strategy, because siding with you meant facing a family truth too dark, too inconvenient, too destabilizing. You represented exposure. Your sister represented comfort. And in families built on performance and appearances, comfort always wins. But here's what they didn't understand about you. You weren't looking for applause. You weren't asking for drama. You were just asking for someone to see you to say, "That's not right," to tell the truth, even if it was uncomfortable. But instead, they poured themselves another drink. They nodded in complicity. They stayed out of it as if staying out of it didn't hand your sister the knife. I remember a Scorpio client, a woman in her late 60s, who once told me, "I forgave my sister for lying about me, but I never forgave my mother for staying silent while she did it." That silence told me everything I needed to know. Scorpio, how many times have you been asked to carry the pain in silence just to keep the family peace? And let me ask you this, who kept the peace for you? Because silence may look like neutrality, but in the energetic realm, silence is alignment. When someone knows the truth and chooses silence, they are not neutral, they are enabling. You are not wrong for feeling the sting of that inaction more deeply than the lie itself. Because betrayal from the one holding the knife wounds the flesh, but betrayal from the one standing beside you doing nothing wounds the soul. And you, Scorpio, you feel soul wounds more than most. You don't need revenge, you need truth. And sometimes the truth is this: some people did not stand with you because they never had the strength to. And that's not your failure, that is their shadow. It's time to stop trying to make their silence make sense. It's time to stop rewriting the memory just to protect the image of someone who didn't protect you. You have spent long enough carrying the weight of both betrayals. Today you lay it down. Not because they asked, not because they apologized, but because your soul deserves a clean field to rise from. Life lesson from part 2. The silent accomplice. Life lesson: silence in the face of injustice is never neutral, it is a choice. And sometimes the greatest betrayal isn't from the one who harms you, but from the one who lets it happen. Scorpio, you are no longer required to hold space for those who abandoned you when it mattered most. Your truth deserves witnesses, not ghosts. From this moment on, let silence only belong to your healing, not to their denial. Part 3. Why you were chosen. The threat of your truth. Scorpio, have you ever asked yourself the question that echoes long after betrayal? Why me? Why did they lie about me? Why did they turn away when I needed them most? Why did they choose silence when they knew the truth? You've played every angle, rewound every scene in your mind like an old film. You've asked if you were too intense, too honest, too difficult. You've tried to shrink your presence, soften your voice, pull back your truth just to be less threatening. But none of it worked, because the problem was never who you were, it was what you reflected. Scorpio, let me speak a sacred truth to you now. You were not betrayed because you were wrong. You were betrayed because you were powerful. You were the mirror, and in your presence they saw parts of themselves they spent their whole lives avoiding. Their jealousy, their cowardice, their dependence on illusion. You didn't expose them by force. You exposed them by existing, by speaking truth in a family that fed on fiction, by being loyal in a system built on convenience, by being deep in a sea of shallow expectations, and they could not handle it. So instead of rising to meet you, they tried to bring you down. They twisted your loyalty into control, your truth into drama, your silence into guilt, but they misunderstood your nature. Because Scorpio doesn't destroy for destruction's sake. Scorpio destroys only what is false. You weren't there to cause chaos, you were there to purge the poison. But in families where dysfunction is normalized, truth becomes the enemy, and you, Scorpio, became the flame they tried to extinguish. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your very presence disrupted the fragile structure they were trying no hard to hold together. Do you remember how they treated the sibling who played along? How they praised the one who smiled and nodded, who never asked uncomfortable questions? How they labeled them easygoing, nice, lovable, while you were called difficult, intense, too much? That's because in a broken system, compliance is rewarded and clarity is punished. But let me tell you something they never dared to admit. They were never afraid of your darkness. They were afraid of your light. Your soul was born with a torch, not to illuminate the stage they wanted to perform on, but to burn down the illusion altogether. And when someone builds their identity on the illusion of goodness, nothing terrifies them more than being seen. You didn't make them insecure. Their refusal to confront their own reflection did. You didn't isolate yourself. They chose comfort over connection. You were not too much. You were just not willing to be less so they could feel safe. And that was your spiritual crime. I once met a Scorpio man who said to me, I used to think I was the family problem, but now I realize I was the only one trying to tell the truth. That hit me like lightning, because that's what so many of you have been taught to believe. That being misunderstood means you need to change. But Scorpio, listen to me. Being misunderstood is part of your sacred assignment. You weren't born to be liked. You were born to break the chain. You are the 8th sign, the sign of transformation. You carry the archetype of death and rebirth. Your energy is where the old dies and the new begins. So, of course, they feared you, because their egos knew what their mouths could not say, that your truth would end their illusion, and they weren't ready. But here's the shift. You don't need them to be ready. You only need to stand in your truth. Not to fight them, not to convince them, but to finally say, I see now, and I release you. Because the deeper truth is this: you were chosen for this fire not to burn, but to transform. Life lesson from part 3, why you were chosen. Life lesson: when you are the mirror, you will often be blamed for the reflection, but that blame is not a sign of your failure, it is proof of your power. Scorpio, your truth is not dangerous, it is disruptive to illusions. And those who cannot handle your light will always call it darkness, but you were not sent to fit in. You were sent to awaken. Part 4, the mirror of shame, when your soul became their scapegoat, Scorpio. Let's go deeper now into the most hidden part of this betrayal. Because this isn't just about what they did, it's about what they projected onto you and how your soul silently carried it. You see, in every dysfunctional system, especially in families, where truth is inconvenient, there is always one person who becomes the mirror. And when that mirror reflects too clearly, too honestly, too uncomfortably, they shatter it. But they don't break the mirror with force. They break it by shame. Scorpio, they made you the problem. They didn't just betray you, they rebranded you. They called you too controlling, too private, too suspicious. They said you were emotionally volatile, vindictive, manipulative. But here's the truth. They will never say out loud, they weren't describing you. They were confessing themselves through projection. Because here's what most people don't understand about the shadow. When someone refuses to own their darkness, they find someone else to hold it for them. And Scorpio, they chose you. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to carry what they could not face. You became the family's emotional scapegoat, not because you caused the fire, but because you refused to pretend there wasn't smoke. Think about it. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the temperature drop before a word was said? Have you ever noticed the sudden pause in conversation when they realize you're listening? Have you ever felt blamed for something you didn't do simply because you saw it? That is not paranoia. That is psychic accuracy. You didn't absorb the family's dysfunction, you diagnosed it. And that made you dangerous. Because while they were busy preserving the performance, you were busy asking, where is the truth? So what did they do? They painted you as the problem. They told others you were unstable. They exaggerated your reactions while downplaying the cause. They turned your pain into a narrative about how hard you are to love. And maybe, just maybe, a part of you started to believe them. That's what shame does, Scorpio. It buries itself inside your psyche like a parasite. It mimics your voice. It tells you, maybe it was my fault. Maybe I am the reason they turned away. But today we end that story. Because the truth is this, they didn't reject you because of what you did. They rejected you because of what you saw. You saw their masks. You saw their secrets. You saw their false harmony. And your very existence threatened to unravel it all. I once sat with a Scorpio client, a deeply intuitive artist who had always felt like the dark sheep of her family. Her sister was the golden child, her father the charmer, her mother the peacekeeper. But behind the smiles were bruises, emotional ones, psychic ones, and she saw them all. When she began speaking her truth in adulthood, the family turned on her like a pack. Not because she lied, but because she refused to lie anymore. And in that moment, she realized something profound. They didn't want healing, they wanted silence dressed as peace. Scorpio, has that ever been your experience? Have you ever felt like your truth was treated as a threat? That the more honest you became, the more distant they grew. That is the pain of being the mirror. But here's what no one tells the mirror. You were never meant to carry their shame. You were never meant to hold the emotional weight of a family afraid of itself. You are not a container for denial. You are the destroyer of illusion. And now you must return their projections, not with revenge, not with anger, but with clarity. You are not what they called you in the heat of discomfort. You are what you became in the ashes of their avoidance. You are not the scapegoat. You are the seer, the transformer, the initiator of truth. They tried to exile you, but they only confirmed your role as the soul who sees what others won't. Life lesson from part 4, the mirror of shame. Life lesson. When people cannot face their own shadows, they project them onto the strongest soul in the room. Scorpio, being blamed is not the same as being guilty. You were not too much. You were just unwilling to lie. Let go of the shame they gave you. It was never yours to hold. You are not here to carry their secrets. You are here to transform them. Part 5. Strategic silence. When Scorpio withdraws, the earth shifts. Scorpio, when the betrayal came first from your sister, then from the silent accomplice, you didn't scream. You didn't fight. You didn't gather the family around the table to plead your case. You withdrew. You went quiet. Not because you were defeated, but because you were assessing. And that silence, it terrified them. You see, when most people go silent, it's a retreat. But when a Scorpio goes silent, it's an awakening. They think you disappeared, but what they didn't realize is that you were in the underworld, collecting data, gathering strength, forging your next incarnation. Because Scorpio never reacts impulsively, you calculate, you meditate, you feel every ripple of betrayal in your soul before deciding how to rise. And that is what makes your silence lethal. Not because it wounds like a scream, but because it reflects like a mirror. And the ones who harmed you, they cannot bear to look at what your silence reveals. Scorpio, your withdrawal wasn't passive. It was sacred strategy. It was the moment you pulled your energy out of a system that fed on your loyalty, the moment you stopped explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you, the moment you stopped begging for truth in a place where lies were the currency. And as you withdrew, something profound happened. They lost access to your energy, to your insight, to your emotional intelligence, to the part of you that once gave endlessly just to feel a sliver of connection. And in that loss, their story began to unravel. Because Scorpio's presence is anchoring. Even when you're quiet, your aura holds the room together. So when you pull back, the structure collapses. I once spoke with a Scorpio man who said something I'll never forget. When I finally stopped speaking to my family, everything fell apart. Not because I destroyed anything, but because I was the one holding it together all along. That's the truth they never acknowledged. You weren't the drama, you were the glue. You weren't the explosion, you were the restraint. But when they pushed too far, when they crossed the line and expected you to stay, you chose silence. And in that silence, the power shifted. Because Scorpio doesn't argue, Scorpio doesn't chase, Scorpio just disappears. And in your absence, their illusions had no one left to lean on. They called you cold, but it was your clarity that chilled them. They said you were unforgiving, but it was your boundaries that made them uncomfortable. Because for the first time in your life, you were choosing you. And Scorpio choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you sovereign. They had a chance to love you in truth. They chose manipulation. They had a chance to defend you in silence. They chose convenience. So you left the battlefield, not to retreat, but to rise from it. And when you rise, Scorpio, the whole earth shifts. Life lesson from part 5. Strategic silence. Life lesson. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the most powerful declaration that you no longer consent to being harmed. Scorpio, when you pull back your energy, you force the universe to reveal what was hidden. Never apologize for your silence when it's rooted in truth. You weren't retreating, you were preparing to transform. Part 6. When the universe saw everything, the laws that never miss a lie. Scorpio, you may have wondered, did anyone see what really happened? Did anyone see the subtle betrayal, the manipulation cloaked in smiles, the silent bystander sipping tea while your soul was bleeding? Let me answer that for you, not as comfort, but as cosmic law. Yes. The universe saw everything. Every averted glance, every false retelling, every moment you sat at the table and realized no one would speak the truth on your behalf. They thought they got away with it because no one called them out. But there is a higher court, a silent, all-seeing order beyond human denial. And in that court, nothing is forgotten, not even the silence. Scorpio, you are ruled by Pluto, the planet of power, transformation, and the deep hidden truth. Pluto doesn't deal in appearances. It rules the undercurrents. It governs soul contracts. And it has one unbreakable principle. Every secret must surface, not on your timeline, not through the mouths of the liars, but through divine alignment, cause and effect. Because the universe doesn't punish, it balances. When you were sitting in that family room, holding your tongue, feeling the burn of betrayal in your chest, the universe was already setting into motion the reckoning. Not to destroy them, but to expose the imbalance. Because your spirit wasn't just wounded, it was interrupted. Your growth, your trust, your expansion was slowed by their choices. And that creates a ripple, a disturbance in the natural order of spiritual cause and effect. And what happens when there is a disturbance? Correction comes. It comes not through fire and lightning, but through the precise unfolding of time. You may have already seen it. The sister who once looked flawless in the eyes of others now struggles to keep her story straight. The silent family member who chose denial now finds themselves increasingly isolated. Opportunities begin to disappear, truths begin to leak, energy begins to shift. And all the while you, Scorpio, have become more powerful, more sovereign, more aligned. Because that's the other side of karmic balance. The one who was wrongly betrayed gets elevated, quietly, steadily. As the lies crumble, the truth rises through you. I once met a Scorpio healer who said to me, "I stopped trying to prove I was right. I just let time prove them wrong, and I let the universe clear the path they tried to block." Scorpio, you are not the enforcer. You are the initiator. The universe does the rest. But here's the truth you must carry now. You were never required to carry the consequences of their behavior. You were never meant to live in a state of spiritual debt, paying for their lies with your silence. The moment you decided to stop participating in the falsehood, you aligned with the truth. And the truth, my dear Scorpio, has a gravitational pull that always brings justice. They may never confess. They may never say I was wrong. But the universe will, in outcomes, in energy shifts, in the way your soul begins to rise without their permission. You don't need their apology, you need your alignment, and that alignment has already begun. Life lesson from part 6, when the universe saw everything. Life lesson. You don't have to chase justice. When you walk in truth, justice chases you. Scorpio betrayal may go unspoken in the human world, but the spiritual realm keeps perfect records. Let the universe carry what your spirit can no longer hold. You are not forgotten. You are protected by divine law. Part 7. When shame turns into power, the phoenix awakens Scorpio. You have carried the shame of others for far too long. Not just their lies, not just their silence, but the invisible weight of their discomfort projected onto you like a stain you never asked for. And because you are so spiritually sensitive, you wore it. You wore the guilt they didn't speak. You wore the tension they didn't acknowledge. You wore the blame they didn't have the courage to carry. And somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, you began to believe the lie. Maybe there's something wrong with me. But hear me now, Scorpio, you are not broken. You are burning. You are not the cursed one. You are the chosen one. Chosen not to suffer, but to rise through the suffering with a power that terrifies those still pretending. Because there is a moment in every Scorpio's life when the shame turns to smoke, when the silence becomes sacred, when the betrayal becomes fuel, and from the ashes, the phoenix rises. This is that moment. Shame was never your home. It was just the darkness you had to pass through to find your own fire. The betrayal did not destroy you. It baptized you. The silence was not a prison, it was a forge. And now the soul that once whispered, "Why me?" has begun to roar, "Watch me." Because let's be clear, they didn't think you'd make it. They didn't think you'd rise. They thought the wound would silence you forever. But Scorpio, you are the sign of rebirth. You don't just survive the fire, you become it. I once worked with a Scorpio woman who told me they buried me in shame, but they didn't know I was a seed. And years later, she became a therapist helping women who had experienced emotional betrayal inside their families. I turned my pain into a platform, she said. I stopped hiding and started healing others. Scorpio, this is your medicine. You don't run from the dark, you mine it, you turn poison into power. You take what was meant to end you and transmute it into your next evolution. And what's even more powerful, you don't seek revenge, you don't play their game, because you've outgrown it. You no longer need to clear your name in a room full of people who can't even face their own reflection. You no longer need to be understood by those who only understand control. You are rising now. And rising doesn't mean explaining. It means owning who you are without shame. You were always meant to rise through this fire because the phoenix inside you has been waiting. And now she's no longer waiting. Life lesson from part 7, when shame turns into power. Life lesson. Shame is not yours to carry when it was born in someone else's cowardice. Scorpio, you were never too much. You were simply surrounded by people who were too small to hold your depth. The betrayal was not your ending. It was your activation. Let your healing be your revolution. Let your rising be your reply. Part 8. The new soul family, you were never meant to walk alone. Scorpio, after all the silence, after the betrayals, the shame, the withdrawal, you may have asked the question that haunts even the strongest souls: will I always be alone? Because when the people who were supposed to protect you become the ones who harm you, when family feels like a battlefield rather than a sanctuary, when truth costs you your place at the table, it's easy to believe that isolation is your destiny. But here's the truth: no one told you growing up you were never meant to stay in the place you were born. You were meant to find your soul tribe. Because blood may bind us by biology, but soul recognizes soul through truth. And truth is what you've always carried. That's why they pushed you away. That's why you never fully fit in, because you weren't there to preserve their illusion. You were there to transcend it. Scorpio, your real family is not the one that kept you small. It's the one that sees your depth and says, "I've been waiting for you." They may not share your last name, your childhood, or your ancestry, but when you speak, they understand without explanation. They don't fear your intensity, they match it. I want to share something with you. There was a Scorpio man in his 70s I worked with years ago. After decades of being shut out by his siblings, misunderstood by his own children, and blamed for seeing too much, he started a simple online group just to talk about philosophy and history. Within months, it became a gathering place for thinkers, seers, and truth-tellers. He told me, "These people understand me better than anyone I've ever shared a Thanksgiving table with. It took me a lifetime, but I finally found my family." And Scorpio, so will you. Because the universe never lets a soul like yours walk alone forever. In fact, your isolation wasn't a punishment, it was a purification. It cleared the noise, it cut the cords, so you could become who you were always meant to be and attract those who resonate with that version. Let me ask you, have you noticed people coming into your life lately who feel strangely familiar even if they're new? People who speak in frequencies instead of small talk. People who don't flinch when you talk about betrayal, shadow work, or transformation. That's not coincidence. That's soul alignment. Because now that you've burned away the false, your true allies can find you. And they don't want you to perform. They don't want your perfection. They want your raw, your real, your radiant, unapologetic depth. These are the people who will sit in the dark with you, not because they want to fix you, but because they've been in the dark too, and they know the power of simply being seen. Scorpio, your soul family is not something you chase. It's something you remember, and when you stand in your truth, they appear. So if you've been feeling the ache of loneliness, know this: you are not being abandoned, you are being rerouted. The ones who left couldn't meet your truth. The ones who are coming will celebrate it. Life lesson from Part 8, the New Soul Family Life Lesson. True family is not defined by blood, but by resonance. Scorpio, the ones who rejected your depth were never your home. Your soul tribe will never ask you to dim your light or silence your truth. You are not alone, you were simply being prepared for the ones who can truly see you. Part 9. You were chosen to break the cycle, and that's why they feared you, Scorpio. Have you ever felt like you were the outsider in your own family? Not because you were rebellious, not because you didn't love them, but because deep down, you just didn't fit the mold. Let me tell you something that might rewire your entire story. You weren't born to fit into the family system. You were born to break it, not to destroy it with bitterness, but to liberate it from generations of dysfunction, silence, and soul-deep denial. You are the cycle breaker, the pattern disruptor, the one who said, "This ends with me." And that, Scorpio, is why they feared you. Not because you were wrong, but because your spirit carried the truth they spent their entire lives avoiding. You didn't inherit just your family's last name. You inherited their karma, their patterns, their secrets, their emotional debt. And unlike the others, you didn't numb it. You felt it. You named it. You refused to normalize it. From a young age, you probably sensed something was off, unspoken tensions. contradictions between words and energy, the performances that passed for connection. You saw the cracks, and when you started asking questions, the system responded the only way it knew how, by pushing you out. Not because you were unsafe, but because you were too awake. And awake people are a threat in systems built on sleep. Scorpio, they didn't hate you. They feared the power you carried to change the narrative. You were the one who said, "No, I will not carry your shame. No, I will not lie to make you comfortable. No, I will not pretend we're okay when we're not." And every time you chose truth over peace, you cracked the foundation of generational illusion. You see, in every bloodline, there's one soul that reincarnates to end the loop. One soul who carries the plutonian fire strong enough to burn through generations of denial. You were that soul, not by accident, not by punishment, but by divine assignment. And that assignment has not been easy. Because breaking cycles doesn't just mean standing alone, it often means being misunderstood, blamed and rejected by those too entangled in the system to see you clearly. But Scorpio, let me say this with the full force of truth. You did not break the family. You broke the illusion. And there's a difference. You didn't walk away from love. You walked away from a pattern that called itself love, but was built on manipulation, silence, and fear. You were never the destroyer, you were the purifier. I once sat with a Scorpio man who had stopped speaking to his entire family for over a decade. Not out of bitterness, but because he refused to participate in the same lies that had poisoned every generation before him. He told me, "They said I ruined the family, but really, I freed the next one." Scorpio, your bravery wasn't loud, it was sacred, it was karmic. It was the fire needed to break what had never been questioned before. And now you are free. You don't need to go back. You don't need to explain. You've already fulfilled your assignment. And your reward, a life lived in truth. A heart held by those who honor your soul. A path no longer chained to inherited pain. Life lesson from part 9. You were chosen to break the cycle. Life lesson, being the first to break the cycle means being the first to bleed, but it also means being the first to be truly free. Scorpio, you were not the problem. You were the solution they couldn't understand. You didn't betray the family. You redeemed it. And now you are no longer bound by the patterns you were born to end. Part 10. Letting go without apology. Why forgiveness is your freedom, not theirs. Scorpio, let's speak now about something no one teaches us how to do, how to let go without getting the apology. Because if you're honest, there's probably a part of you quiet wounded, maybe even still waiting, that dreams of the day they'll come back and say, "You were right. I hurt you. I'm sorry." But they haven't, and some of them never will. Not because they don't know. Oh no, Scorpio, they know. They know they betrayed you. They know they twisted the truth. They know they chose silence when it mattered most. But they also know something else, that if they apologize, they're no longer in control of the story. That an apology would unravel the version of reality they've convinced others and themselves is true. And so they stay silent, or worse, they double down, pretending nothing ever happened, acting like you're the one who made things dramatic. And what does that leave you with? The emotional debt, the psychic residue, the burden of knowing what happened without any form of acknowledgement. But Scorpio, what if I told you, you don't need the apology, you need the release. Forgiveness is not something you give to them, it's something you give to yourself. Because as long as you wait for them to take responsibility, your soul remains tied to their timeline. You remain energetically connected to someone who's still committed to denying your truth. And that, Scorpio, is a cage your spirit cannot live in. You don't forgive because they earned it. You forgive because you deserve your power back. Because the apology might never come, but the freedom that can begin today. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean letting them back in. And it absolutely does not mean excusing what they did. Forgiveness is simply the sacred decision that says, I will no longer allow your wound to live in my body. I will no longer rehearse the pain in my mind. I will no longer let the absence of your apology delay the fullness of my becoming. It's not gentle, it's not soft. For a Scorpio, forgiveness is alchemy. It's looking at the scar and saying, "You no longer define me." It's cutting the invisible cord that bound your spirit to a story that was never yours to carry. I once sat with a Scorpio healer who told me I never got an apology. But I realized one day, I didn't need one to be whole. Their silence no longer shackles me. I've moved on. I've risen. Scorpio, you were never meant to live in emotional limbo. Letting go isn't weakness, it's sovereignty. It's standing in your truth and saying, I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not punishing myself for your inability to grow. I'm choosing me, and I'm free. Life lesson from part 10, letting go without apology. Life lesson, waiting for an apology keeps you tied to a timeline that no longer serves you. Scorpio, your freedom does not depend on their remorse. Forgiveness isn't for their comfort, it's for your release. You don't need closure from them, you need liberation for you. Part 11, the soul contract is complete. What the pain was preparing you for, Scorpio, everything you've experienced, the betrayal, the silence, the shame, the withdrawal, the isolation, the aching need for closure was not random. It was written. Long before you took your first breath, your soul entered into a contract. A sacred agreement forged in the spirit realm, sealed by light and shadow. And in that agreement, you chose your family. You chose your bloodline. You chose to be born into a system filled with unspoken wounds and inherited silence. Why? Because you knew what they would try to hide would be the very thing you came to reveal. You agreed to walk through the fire, not to be consumed by it, but to carry something out of it. Power, wisdom, healing. You didn't incarnate to live an easy life. You incarnated to complete the unfinished business of generations. You were sent to excavate the pain that no one before you had the strength to name, to feel the sorrow they buried, to witness the deception they normalized, to walk into the karmic storm and emerge with the map. This is why it hurts so deeply, because this wasn't just about one lifetime. This was the culmination of many. You've likely felt it before, that strange, unexplainable heaviness, that sense that this pain is older than your memory, that the betrayal wasn't just about this life, it echoed from somewhere far beyond. That's because it did. You were born to be the soul who ends the echo, the final chapter of an ancient story that your ancestors could never finish. And now, Scorpio, that contract is complete. You have faced the fire, you have sat in the silence, you have walked through the underworld with no guide but your intuition. You have carried pain that didn't begin with you and transformed it into power that no one can take from you. You didn't just survive, you succeeded. And that means something cosmic has shifted. You no longer owe the past your loyalty. You no longer have to prove anything to those who couldn't see you. You no longer have to explain your intensity, your withdrawal, your rebirth. That chapter is closed, not with a slam, but with a sacred sovereign whisper, I have fulfilled my soul's agreement, and now I rise beyond it. Scorpio, I once guided a Scorpio woman through ancestral healing work. She told me she had dreams for years of a grandmother she'd never met. Always silent, always watching. After confronting her family's generational secret, the dreams stopped. But she didn't feel abandoned, she felt released. The silence is gone, she said, because I finally said what no one before me could say. That's the moment we all wait for, when the soul contract dissolves and a new reality begins. And for you, Scorpio, that moment is now. Life lesson from part 11. The soul contract is complete life lesson. You were not chosen to suffer. You were chosen to complete a sacred mission. Scorpio, your pain had a purpose. It was the key that unlocked your spiritual destiny. Now that the contract is complete, your past no longer owns you. You are free to create your future from truth, not trauma. Part 12. The final cut, when you stop protecting those who harmed you. Scorpio, let's speak now of something you've done for far too long and maybe without even realizing it. You've been protecting the people who hurt you, not with your words, but with your silence, with your restraint, with your choice to carry the burden alone rather than cause drama, with your unwillingness to name the truth because it might shake the family, disturb the peace, or make others uncomfortable. But let me ask you this: when did your protection become their permission? When did your silence give them the stage? When did your loyalty get mistaken for weakness? When did your empathy start enabling? Scorpio, this part is hard because you are loyal to the core, even to those who don't deserve it, even to those who have proven again and again they would never hold your truth with the same care. But the time has come. The final cut must be made. And no, this isn't about revenge. It's not about shaming anyone. It's about finally releasing yourself from the invisible contract to keep their secrets safe while yours suffocated. You see, when we stay silent for the sake of others' comfort, we betray ourselves. And you, Scorpio, have been loyal to others' peace for too long while your own soul burned for justice. But here's the truth. You don't owe them your protection anymore. They used your silence to shield themselves from accountability. They weaponized your grace. They stood behind your integrity like a wall, so no one would see who they really were. And all this time you thought staying quiet was noble. But now you realize it's been a prison. The final cut is spiritual. It's energetic. It's when you finally say, no more covering, no more explaining, no more holding your shame in my body like it belongs to me. I release you, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Because here's the deeper truth. Every time you protect someone who has not done their own healing, you pay the price for their denial. And Scorpio, you've already paid enough. The final cut is not a scream, it's a decision. To walk forward without looking back, to build without permission, to speak without fear, to live without apology. This is not the Scorpio who bends, this is the Scorpio who becomes legend. I once heard a Scorpio client say, they buried their secret inside me, but I won't die for it. And with that sentence, she cut the cord. So now I ask you, Scorpio, what secret have you been protecting at the cost of your own soul? And are you ready to let it go? Because when the final cut is made, you don't just walk away, you fly. Life lesson from part 12. The final cut. Life lesson. There comes a time when silence is no longer strength, but surrender. Scorpio, protecting those who harmed you is not loyalty, it is self-betrayal. The final cut is not about hurting them, it's about finally choosing to heal you. This is the moment you stop being their shelter and become your own liberation. Closing. You didn't lose them. You released the illusion, Scorpio, after everything, the betrayals, the silence, the unraveling of family myths, the long nights of asking, was it me? You've arrived at the threshold of your truth. And now it's time to say it out loud, once and for all. You didn't lose them, you released the illusion. You stopped protecting people who built their peace on your pain. You stopped shrinking yourself to make them feel taller. You stopped waiting for validation from mouths that never had the capacity to speak the truth. And in doing so, you didn't just walk away from them, you walked back to yourself. You are not the problem. You are not the villain. You are not the one who ruined the family. You are the one who refused to carry its shadows in silence. Because somewhere deep in your being, long before the betrayal, long before the disappointment, long before the silence that haunted your bones, you made a vow. A soul vow. I will speak what they won't. I will feel what they numb. I will transform what they repeat. I will end this, even if it costs me everything. Scorpio, you kept that vow, and now the cost has become your crown. The wound has become your wisdom. The silence has become your sacred power. The fire has become your rebirth. And what awaits you? A tribe that speaks your language. A path built on truth, not tolerance. A life where you never again apologize for your depth, your power, or your ability to see through the veil. You are the phoenix, the alchemist, the shadow walker, the truth bringer. You were never meant to be easy. You were meant to be eternal. So today we close the door, not with anger, but with sovereignty. The soul contract is complete. The karmic debt is paid. The final cut has been made. Now rise, Scorpio, and never look back. Your turn. The sacred call to action. If this journey spoke to something deep inside you, if you felt seen, heard, remembered, then this was not just a video, it was a soul message. I invite you now to comment below. Tell me, what final cut are you ready to make? Your story could help another Scorpio finally rise. Subscribe to the Path to Buddha Wisdom. This isn't just a channel, it's a sanctuary, a place for the deep ones, the misunderstood ones, the ancient souls in modern bodies. You belong here. Share this video with a Scorpio who needs to hear this, or with someone who never understood why you had to walk away. And above all, remember who you are, because your truth was never too much. It was just too sacred for the places you were forced to shrink inside. Now go, and let the rest of your life be built not on apology, but on unapologetic power.